Hello again. This week we are continuing our little series on favourite Bible characters, and today I would like to tell you something about one of my favourite people in the Bible, Simon Peter. Peter was one of the 12 men chosen by Jesus to be his disciples. His given name was Simon, and he was a fisherman from Galilee, just a very ordinary guy with little or no formal education, a man who was both strong and weak at the same time, a man full of bluster and good intentions who had a tendency to put his foot in it and say the wrong thing, but a man who at other times showed remarkable spiritual insight. He was a guy in whom Jesus saw enormous potential, the man to whom Jesus gave the name Peter, the rock, because he would be the one on whom Jesus would found his church. Peter and his brother Andrew left their fishing business in Galilee to become followers of Jesus, and for 3 years they travelled around with him, listening to his teaching, seeing him perform miracles, and throughout that time they were being prepared for the work that Jesus had chosen them to do after he returned to heaven to be with his Father. We probably know more about Peter than about any of the other disciples, and I'd like to tell you just 4 things about him. Firstly, in spite of his humble background and lack of education, Peter was able to understand who Jesus really was. When Jesus asked the disciples who people thought he was, it was Peter who spoke up and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Peter recognised that Jesus was the promised Messiah, the one the Jews had been waiting for. Secondly, Peter had a genuine desire to be unswervingly faithful to Jesus. When Jesus warned the disciples that the day was coming when fear of the consequences of being his followers would lead them to run and abandon him, Peter was absolutely horrified, and his response was, "Others will turn and flee, but I will never leave you." Perhaps even more horrifying for Peter was Jesus' response with the sobering words that when the time came, Peter would deny him 3 times before the cock crowed. Thirdly, in spite of his good intentions, Peter messed up well and truly and let Jesus down very badly. After Jesus was arrested and put on trial, the disciples did indeed run. Peter hung about in the crowd, watching what was happening, trying to be inconspicuous, but 3 times he was asked, "Are you not one of his followers?" 3 times he denied it. "I don't know the man." Just after denying Jesus for the 3rd time, he heard the cock crowing, and of course, he immediately remembered Jesus' words, and his world fell apart. He felt devastated, ashamed, utterly disappointed in himself. He had let his best friend down, and in his mind he had blown any chance of being the person he had wanted to be for Jesus, blown any chance of being the person on whom Jesus would found his church. Fourthly, and this is the really good news, Peter discovered that no matter how badly he had messed up, Jesus still loved him and would forgive him, and would entrust him with new challenges for the future. After he rose from the dead, Jesus appeared to his disciples on a number of occasions, but there was one time that was especially meaningful for Peter. The disciples had been out fishing during the night and saw Jesus preparing breakfast for them on the shore. As they sat round the fire, Jesus asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me, Peter?" And 3 times Peter responded, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And 3 times Jesus gave him the instruction, "Look after my sheep." In other words, care for those who would be Jesus' followers in the future. Peter knew then that he had been forgiven, that the mistakes of the past had been wiped out, and that Jesus still had a plan and a purpose for him. Why is Peter one of my favourite characters in the Bible? Mainly because I draw hope and encouragement from his story. He was just an ordinary guy who recognised who Jesus was and wanted to follow him. He was an ordinary guy who made mistakes, didn't always get things right, and indeed on one occasion at least got things very badly wrong. He was an ordinary guy who discovered that no matter how badly he had messed up, Jesus could still forgive him, and not only forgive him, but give him a fresh purpose and use him greatly. And indeed, Peter went on to be one of the leaders of the early church. Peter's story is one of failure, forgiveness, and fresh usefulness. And it gives me such encouragement to know that what was true for Peter is also true for you and me. You can read more about Peter in the Gospels and also in the book of the Acts. And I hope that his story will encourage you as it has encouraged me.